So the elements of this music, many of them, developed in Andalusia during this period of Muslim rule, and then came over in waves as the Spanish Catholics began to push further and further south, and eventually in 1492 pushed the Muslims and Jews out of the continent of Europe, at least temporarily, or the Iberian Peninsula, when it came into North Africa. And it has been in North Africa ever since, cherished as a memory of this period of great political power, of economic wealth, and artistic creativity. But it is now, what we're going to be talking about today primarily, is emphatically a Moroccan version of this. Since the 13th century, there have been North African additions and changes to this music in Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. Moroccans have changed things. They have made selections from the past. They have made additions to the music. So officially, really, it should be Andalusian, Moroccan Andalusian music. So, nevertheless, for all that, it did begin in Al-Andalus, and many of the aspects of Andalusian culture came back down into North Africa. So this is a map showing the extent of the Muslim world at various periods. Arab armies proselytizing and conquering came out of the Arabian Peninsula shortly after the Prophet's death in 632 of the Common Era, up into Egypt, spread across North Africa, over time picking up converts, picking up recruits from indigenous people along the way, from Berbers and others. And then early in the 8th century, 714, someone can probably correct me on that, crossed over the Straits of Gibraltar, Gibraltar being the name for or Jabal Tariq, the name named for the general who led the troops, up into Spain and all the way up to Poitiers in central France, where in 732 they were defeated by Charles Martel, and then over the next 750 years fell gradually backward, further and further south. Here's a somewhat later map around 1000 in the Common Era, and you can see that about 2/3 of Spain at that time were controlled by the Moors, by the Muslims, by the Western Arab Empire, which I'll get to in a moment. Toledo was among the first to fall, and then gradually we come down to here, where Al-Andalus is now being pressured by particularly the Kingdom of Castile. So, Andalus, if we go back very quickly to the first map, this represents the total extent of Muslim domination at that time. But after the year 750, the Muslim empire sort of split in a number of parts, but for our purposes, particularly into a Western and Eastern version, with the fall of the Umayyad dynasty in Damascus to the Abbasids, who came from further east and who moved the capital to Baghdad. Some Umayyad rulers fled and came to Andalusia, where they set up a new dynasty in competition with the East. And that competition, for our purposes, was, at least in part, largely cultural. And we will see one of the artifacts of that a little bit later on. Just to remind you of some of the glories of Al-Andalus at this time, this is a painting of, maybe we should turn out the lights so people can get a good snooze. This is a painting, a 19th century painting of the Alhambra, perhaps the most famous single left over from Moorish domination in southern Spain. And I want to take you quickly through it, through the gardens, up into courtyards, the courtyard of the lions, and this is a fantasy from the 19th century by the Austrian-French painter Rudolf Ernst. And the point here, I think, is that he was a wonderful painter, but not necessarily a particularly careful observer, as was often the case with Orientalist painters. He got some of the proportions wrong, and he got the tiles very wrong. And it's the tiles that I want to look at, similar to the tiles that we saw on the first slide with the musicians. Here's an example from within the Alhambra, and what you should take away from this, what you should think about, is the way in which these tiles were constructed, because I'm going to use that as an analogy for the way in which the poetry and the music fit together later on. Each of these tiles, you'll see more clearly in another example, each of these tiles is cut from a square tile, at least in the traditional fashion. These are known as the Salij in Morocco, or azulejos in Spain. The idea of mosaics probably came from the Greeks or the Romans, who had also, of course, colonized this area previously. But the genius of the Andalusian craftsmen was to take glazed tiles and make them in squares and then cut them into various shapes, and a limited number of shapes, maybe 20 or 30 shapes, from which they were able to create an infinite number of different designs, simply by reconfiguring the shapes and the colors in different patterns. The designs could go on forever and ever and ever, and the variety is enormous. I think in this slide you can see the places in which the tiles are joined together. One of the things that I don't think has an analogy to music, but the putting together of these tiles is done without the benefit of color, or even exactly the benefit of the shape. The tile maker takes the tiles, knows the pattern, puts them face down, so he sees only the sort of rust red background, puts them down into a pattern, and then cement or plaster is poured over them to hold them together. Just a small example of how slight changes in shape can change the effect that the tiles have on us. This may be too subtle, but you can see with just the substitution, in this case, of one color and one tile shape, you get a different feeling from the tile. Just that. And then if you change the colors again, you get more variation. So within one basic pattern, there is the possibility, again, of almost endless variety. It's like fractals. The changes go on and on and on. And the patterns also can go on and on and on. The late ethnomusicologist Lois Ibsen Al-Farouqi tried to make an analogy between Moorish design and Muashahat, the kind of poetry and music that we're talking about, but from an Egyptian perspective. And I think she got it wrong in many ways, but she did capture the sense that this was open-ended and infinite in its possibilities. It is also possible, instead of having an infinite expanse, to have, to have abrupt juxtapositions of different patterns, shifts, in the case of music, shifts of rhythm, shifts of style from one piece to another, juxtaposed against each other without any transition. And here you see that kind of thing with 2 or 3 different patterns, as well as patterns executed in plaster and in marble, all put together at the same time. So it cuts both ways. Now, in Spain, many of the tiles that you see, and I don't know, this is again the Alhambra, but I don't know if this is a restoration. Here the tiles are square tiles that are painted. It's also a more floral pattern, but still dependent on very precise geometry. There is a science behind this, as creative and extravagant as it is in the design. But if we shift now to Morocco, the tile tradition that arose in Spain, in Moorish Spain, continues in Morocco today. Continues, this is not a contemporary piece, but it continues with the creation of new designs, the introduction of new colors, as well as the preservation of the old patterns and of the old techniques. And you can't, this is actually greatly enlarged. The actual area of this is maybe a foot wide. And the detailing and the precision with which they have worked the various individual tile pieces. This is not a painted thing. this is an assembled mosaic. The detail, again, is testimony to the extraordinary craftsmanship and artistry that Moroccans have taken from Andalusia and made their own through transformation and have perpetuated into the 21st century, as we now are. Here are some more examples. This is the tomb of Muley Ismail in Meknes. Another one from the same place. This is back in Fez, and with this one, you see the introduction of calligraphy also. Different pattern, different style of tile that I won't go into, but you have the geometric designs, you have the floral designs, and especially in sacred architecture, but not limited to sacred architecture, you have the introduction of text as being the primary, the geometry, floral, and text being the primary design motifs. And in a sense, we're going to see the same kind of thing in music. And more text, and yet more text. So, I mentioned earlier, now an abrupt transition, I mentioned earlier this competition between the East and the West, between the Umayyad dynasties and their successors in Andalusia and the Abbasids in Baghdad. And this was rather like the competition between different cities, say, over a sports team or something else. There was more to it than that. But certainly in terms of culture, people vied for having the greatest poets, the greatest musicians in their court, as opposed to somebody else's court. Just a way of expressing pride and also perhaps a little bit of conspicuous consumption. So, one of the prize catches, going back now to the early 9th century, one of the prize catches was, again, a fantasy, was this man. This is supposed to be a picture of Ziryab. Ziryab was a musician in the court of Baghdad around the turn of between the 8th and 9th century of the Common Era. And he was in fact dark-complected. He was known as the Blackbird. He was in fact an oud player, although presumably he knew better how to hold the oud and play it than the gentleman in the picture. But it does give you an idea of who the person might have been. Ziryab was a student of Ibrahim al-Mawsili, one of the great musicians of Arab history, and a competitor of Ibn Jamir. These two, al-Mawsili and Ibn Jamir, were competitors in a particular way. Al-Mawsili was an upholder of tradition. Ibn Jamir was an upholder of creative modernism. So this is an argument. The argument between the traditional and the modern goes back more than 1,200 years. It's a constant argument in Arab music and in other parts of culture. Among Ibrahim's sons were rather his students were his son Ishaq, who was perhaps his equal as a master of music, and Ziryab. And Ziryab was perhaps a descendant of a slave. He was certainly black. He was probably not an Arab, not an honored person. Ibn Jamir's student, Ibrahim al-Mahdi, on the other hand, was an aristocrat. Just to show, again, the range of people who participated in music from different perspectives. Ziryab and Ishaq were also competitors within the traditional vein, and Ishaq, because he was connected to his father, Ibrahim, had more political power than Ziryab, and he said, this town isn't big enough for both of us. So either you leave or you die. I will fix you. Ziryab fled. This, by the way, all took place, well, at least the early parts of it, took place at the court of Harun al-Rashid, the Abbasid Sultan, who was known both from the 1001 Nights, sort of legendarily, and somewhat more accurately, from Isfahani's Kitab al-Aghani. So these are historical characters, shrouded in myth and legend. Ziryab fled westward. He moved across North Africa. He had a brief stay in Tunisia, where he again got into political problems, and then was invited by the Sultan or by the Emir, the Prince of Cordoba, one of the small states in Andalusia, to come there. By the time he arrived, the person who had invited him had died, but his successor, Abdurrahman II, welcomed Ziryab with, as legend has it, a gift of his own weight in gold. So valued was Ziryab, and with good reason. He was not only a good-looking person, he was a man of impeccable taste. He was a person who dictated fashion, dictated the culinary arts. In addition to music, he was a person who was a style setter. I don't know that we have really an analogy in this country. Maybe Puff Daddy, whatever he's called now, P. Diddy, or Jay-Z. I'm not sure. I don't think we have anybody who dominates American culture in the same way that Ziryab dominated the culture in Cordoba. Well, Ziryab's principal contribution, at least for our purposes, was his music. He was a great musician, and he had ideas about music. And among the things that he brought to Andalusian Spain was the concept of the nuba, or nauba, as you hear. The nuba just means turn. It's my turn, it's your turn, it's Joel's turn, it's somebody else's turn next. In the court of Harun al-Rashid, each of the musicians and the dancers and the poets each had a turn. When there was a gathering, a majlis, a session, each participant was expected to contribute something to enlighten people and enliven the atmosphere. So Ziryab brought this concept of nuba, which in the case of music was a suite of songs, a succession of songs. Each person would be given a certain period of time, maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, perhaps longer, in which to sing a continuous sequence of songs which included both the idea of unity, they were somehow joined together, and variety, so that people didn't get bored hearing the same thing over and over and over again. He also, or at least we think, we may be on shaky ground, brought the idea of taba, which means stamp, or particularly in this case, the stamp of nature. And Ziryab's concept, as reported, was that the tabur were an ethical expression of all kinds of things, mood, season, time of day, and so forth. And this was the term that has been applied to Moroccan modal structures, melodic structures. This is different, in a sense, from what you may know about Eastern Arab music or Turkish music. This is not maqam. Maqam, the saying goes, it depends on the position of fingering and the precise, relatively, measurement of intervals. A melodic structure defined more melodically, whereas taba is a melodic structure that is defined out of the melodies rather than creating the melodies, and has this more ethical feeling to it, ethos. It's rather like the Baroque doctrine of affections, where music, or in common terms, major scales are supposed to make you happy, minor scales are supposed to make you sad, to state it in its most banal form. So the taba was supposed to be full of content. This is a chart which we won't be able to go through entirely, in which 4 families of tabor, 4 families of melodic structures, were said to have relation to the humors, the bodily fluids that affect our mood and that affect our health. And so some are hot, some are cold, some are angry, some are happy, and so forth. And each of the tabor was supposed somehow to express these characteristics, or some of these characteristics. As a result, Ziryab postulated a system of 24 modes, each of which would have its own nuba, each of which would be suitable for performance at a specific hour of the day, and also for specific seasons and specific moods and conditions. So until recently, until certainly the 20th century, and perhaps still today, I don't know, there was a group of Andalusian musicians in Fez who would go to the insane asylum and to play for the patients there, to play for at the mental hospital, play for the mental patients. And the idea, much as in the dietary conditions that are supposed to reflect humors, if you have an excess of phlegm, for example, as I happen to right now, getting over my cold, then you would play the opposite kind of music. If you have an excess of bile, then you would play the opposite kind of music in order to achieve a balance of the humors and achieve perfect mental and physical health. Well, this is, as it says, from 1967. This is a chart related to the previous chart, developed by someone from Tangier named Mulay Larbi Al-Ghazani, from a family of ardent amateur musicians and also religious leaders. An interesting combination in light of the way that the relationship of music and Islam is often portrayed. The Ghazanis were one of the most distinguished religious families in Morocco, and yet some of the greatest supporters and performers of music. So Mulay Larbi, in similar fashion, set up this chart of the various tubour that existed in Morocco around a circle. This was, as it says, in 1967. So many of the same ideas continue today, although the knowledge is esoteric, not everybody shares it, not everybody knows it. Well, sometime between 820, when Ziryab arrived and postulated this system, and 1967, or really much earlier, things began to go awry. And my suspicion is that Ziryab's system was actually never fully realized. It was never completely created. It was more hypothetical than real. But the earliest document we have that outlines pretty much the system of Andalusian music as it exists today is around the year 1800 of the Common Era, 200 years ago, a little bit more. It might have been earlier than that. It might have been 1889 or 1899, 1789, 1799. We don't know, but it's around 1800. And a musician and a poet, Muhammad al-Hussein al-Haik, gathered what he described as the remnants of the Andalusian tradition as they existed in the city of Tetuan on the Mediterranean coast, which is where he lived. And he organized them according to the tubour. And his guidance in this was often the textual content, because the text also reflected the ethos, the mood, the time, and so forth that were appropriate to each individual mode. He grouped it into 11 families, which I won't. This won't be on the test. Don't worry. And under these 11 families, he also included what he called the orphans, the ones that did not exist in a complete nuba. I'll get to what a complete nuba is in just a moment. And if you count up on Mulay Larbi's chart before, or on the table of contents in al-Haik's manuscript, if you count up all the ones in parentheses, you'll find out that, in fact, there are supposedly 26 tubour and not 24, which again leads me to believe that the system of 24 was merely a kind of template that didn't precisely exist. But there are now 11 nubas in Morocco, and this becomes the canon then of Moroccan music in the 19th century and in the 20th century. And this has been recorded in 11 boxed sets of CDs by the Moroccan government, including, were you on that, Fatima?
No.
No. But Mohammed Gregorio was performed on it. The musician that you'll hear tonight is on this set of 66 CDs that includes what is believed to be the entire repertoire of Andalusian music. Here is a model of how the nuba should work. You have the taba, the overriding ethical force. Then you have some introductory material that is in first unmeasured, free rhythm, and then measured, that is instrumental and gets the listener acoustically, auditorially in the mood for what is to follow. And then each nuba is divided into 5 mizans. Mizan means measure or scale. And this refers to the meters. There are 5 different meters. Now, in Eastern Arabic music, actually starting in Algeria, when you have separate subsections of performance in a nuba, they also use the term nuba, at least a few of these will be represented in a single performance to give the variety that a nuba should have. So you move from a 6/4 rhythm to an 8/8 rhythm to a faster 8/8, and then to a 6/8, and so on. So that there is a progression of different meters that lends variety to the performance over the course of a half hour, 45 minutes, hour and a half, whatever it is. Because of the way Al-Hayk set things up, with all of the poetry that was suitable for performance in a given nuba and a given mizan, it became like a guide for performers who then began to perform pieces straight out of Al-Hayk, one verse after another. And as I've just said, 66 CDs. One nuba takes often 6 hours or more to perform. And this, of course, would completely violate the ethical provision. You couldn't play the entire thing. So what has happened in Morocco, and one of the things that distinguishes most, not all, but most Moroccan Andalusian practice from the practice of similar naubas or fossils in Egypt, in Turkey, excuse me, or wasla in Egypt, is that there is less rhythmic variety, less metric variety in the performance. They tend to concentrate not only on one taba, but also on one mizan, or even part of one mizan, because half a mizan can take an hour or half an hour easily. There is some variety, but it's not as structurally built in as it is in other traditions of Arab music. Then each mizan, in turn, is divided into principally 2, a slow part, a largo, a broad part, muwassa, and what's called a departure, an exit, which is a much faster tempo, with bridges, antra, in between, and a somewhat lighter section also in between. So 2 or 3 sections to a complete mizan. So the rhythmic characteristic of the Moroccan nuba is acceleration. It starts out slow, and it gets gradually faster and faster and faster and faster. So that brings in the variety. But you will sometimes hear the performance of a piece that is entirely not only in one taba, but also in one mizan, in one measure. Okay, so that's, again, getting ahead of things, going from the 9th century to the 21st. Let's back up again to Al-Hayk. Another accomplishment that he is credited with is the addition of a 5th string to the lute. That now has 6 courses. And that was perhaps not considered to be revolutionary, but if you think about it, it expands the melodic possibilities by 25%. Take the occasion to go through some of the other instruments and also show that you see the rosette over the sound hole. This is also like bringing some of these complicated geometric and floral designs into the instrument itself, striking yet another parallel between, these are actually Syrian, a parallel between the graphic design and the musical design. This one includes the names of a number of Eastern maqams or modal systems. Another important instrument, this is a picture of Hajj al-Rais right here. who was Muhammad Breuel's teacher and probably the most important Andalusian musician of the second half of the 20th century. Another addition, probably in the 19th century, is the violin. Played a violin and viola, and sometimes small violins, played upright on the knee, replacing another instrument that we'll talk about in a second. And the tambourine, which is a guiding force for the rhythm, different from tambourines from other parts of the Arab world. It is smaller, deeper, and if you go to the performance tonight, watch the way the tambourine is played, because it's very light in the hands of the performer. The performer is really dancing as he performs the strokes. A more recent addition, from actually coming up from folk music, is the darbuka in Moroccan pronunciation. In other parts of the Middle East, it's called dumbek or tabla. And finally, an instrument that unfortunately I don't think you will be seeing tonight, but what is considered to be the heart and soul of the ensemble is the rebab, a two-stringed instrument, very heavy gut strings with, as you see in the slide now in the center, a bamboo bridge, difficult to play, hard to hear. We'll hear an example in just a little bit. Hard to hear, but it is the symbolic core of the instrument, and often, not always, clearly anymore, played by the leader. That's the instrument that Hajj Abdul was playing in that slide earlier on. It's an instrument that is found elsewhere in North Africa. It still exists in Tunisia in slightly different configuration. This kind of structure of a single hollowed-out body with a wood cover on top and a sound hole and a skin cover on the bottom appears in the Arabian Peninsula. It appears in South Asia. It even appears in Indonesia, but not as a bowed instrument. So in that regard, it's an instrument that is unique to Morocco, and it harkens back to the Andalusian days. This is an illustration from the Cantigas de Santa Maria, 13th century, I think, collection of songs for the Virgin Mary, compiled by Alfonso el Sabio, a Spanish king, but which draws heavily on Moorish musical practice, including the instruments, the lute, and the rebab. These instruments and others came into Europe through Andalusia. It's one of the many ways in which Andalusia influenced European culture, European arts and culture. There are many more that we could talk about. So these illustrations from the Cantigas are very revealing. Not only the representation of the instruments may not be completely accurate, but it's close enough so that we can tell what instruments we're talking about and see the similarities in the structure to instruments that are still being used today. Here's another one which is perhaps even more revealing, in which you have a musician, again this is a Catholic text, a musician in Catholic dress who is playing and watching the performance of a Moorish performer, of a Muslim performer. This was still an era in which there was collaboration, in which there was respect for the Moorish contribution to Andalusian culture, and the Catholics were clearly learning from the Moors. So, what might this music have sounded like? I think it's time to get to that if my computer will cooperate. We've already heard one example. I want to play three examples very quickly of the same piece rendered in very different ways. The first of these is by Gregorio Paniagua, a Spanish medieval performer, that is, he's a contemporary performer, interested in medieval music, who, because of the cantigas, wanted to incorporate these early Moorish ideas into his performance. there any way to turn it up? Layla here? No, it's up as far as I can go. There's no control on the... Okay, next example is from an orchestra from Fez. It's the same piece that we heard the first time, again now, and a third example. Here you can hear the rabab, the instrument that is sort of grunting, an oud, and another smaller lute. Fourth example, this time with a violin added to it. Not the same piece this time. I'm not sure that the volume was enough for you to be able to hear the difference between them. The first one was very airy, perhaps recorded in a cathedral, with a flute and a tinkly little lute and a very loud drum. It was the impression of a Spaniard versed in medieval European music about how this music might have sounded 1,000 years ago. This second example was an example, the reconstruction of a French ethnomusicologist using a French orchestra of what the music might have sounded like in the 19th century. The third example was from Cairo in 1932, where there was a big Arab music conference with an orchestra, a Moroccan orchestra, quite different from the orchestra that we get now. The point is there have been changes, and today the sound of the violin largely dominates. There are more violins than any other instrument. The violins are now strung with steel strings rather than with gut strings. So the sound of the music has changed dramatically, perhaps only for geeks, but it seems dramatic, has changed dramatically over the years, and we do not actually know precisely what it sounded like. Okay, one more component should go into this, and I'm not going to translate this for you. I'm just going to illustrate. In addition to the theories of Ziria and the instrumental connections, the contributions that he made in terms of instrument design, the other component, the other essential component in understanding Andalusian music, Moroccan Andalusian music, is the poetry. And we're not going to give a lesson in Arabic here, but rather a lesson in poetic structure. This is a qasida, which is a monorhyme, monometric form of poetry that arose in the Arabian Peninsula sometime in, as far as we know, sometime in the 6th century. A form of poetry that is still practiced today. This is by the Baghdad poet Abu Nuwas. Hamil hawa ta'ibu yastakhifu atarabu in baka yahikku lahu laysa ma bihi la'bu kullama anqada sababun minka adali sababu tadhakina hiyatan wal muhibbu yantahibu ta'jabina min saqami sihhatihi al-ajabu. Sorry, the language is rich with puns, with plays on words. Just here, you wonder at my illness, my health is the wonder. So there are these complex interactions where words are broken apart and reconstructed, where ideas are opposed to one another, sleeping, waking, crying, laughing, and so forth. The point, though, is حامل الهوى التعب بيو يستخفه الطرب. The bearer of love is tired, sick. He is enlightened, lifted up by music. So you have a rhyme, an internal rhyme, in the first and second half of the poem, which then continues through the second half of every line. This is a 5-line poem. It could be 20 lines, it could be 1,000 lines. The meter and the terminal rhyme do not change. From a musical point of view, this does not mean that the same melody is being repeated over and over again. From a musical point of view, this is actually could be quite open and flexible, and has been. But the point is, this was the model of poetry in the Eastern Arab world, continues to be a predominant model of poetry even today. It's an art that is still practiced. And so forth. In Andalusia, on the other hand, borrowing from the Romance poetry, the medieval Spanish poetry of the Catholics, through often the intermediary of the Jews, a new form of Arabic poetry developed. For the first time in hundreds of years, this was considered to be the first innovation in Arabic poetry. This was the muashat, which means girdled or tied around, because it's no longer an open structure, it is now a closed strophic structure. So instead of having a basis of one line being repeated over and over and over again, you have verses, strophes, of 5 or 7 or sometimes other lengths being repeated. It's a larger structure. This muashat is a sana, that is a verse, from Qadem, that's the meter, the mizan, of Ramamaya, that's the taba. It's actually the first from that particular section. And here you see, من حبك خير الورى محمد طبيب القلوب لح بدر لما صار ويفشي جميع الكروب هم نبقى بعيد يا ترى مقيد بقيد الذنوب أهل الرشد لو علموا مع كل ما أجرموا. We have a new meter and a new rhyme. حين وقفوا في باب سلام على المصطفى سلام. Just translate it quickly or try to. How great is my love for the goodness, the wonder of the beyond. Muhammad, the doctor of hearts. The moon sparkled when he walked by night, and he took away all of our ills. How far away do I stand, don't you see? Tied up with muqayyid, with the bonds of sin. The wise people, if only they knew, they would wipe away all of the things that they have done wrong. When they stop at the door of salvation, at the gates of heaven, they give their greetings to the chosen one, to Mustafa. So that is the line, and the poetic structure is very different from what we had before. We have rhymes internally here and over there, and then a shift in the rhyme scheme. So you have what looks like A, B, A, B, A, B, C, 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 but which is generally set up as follows: B, 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 a repetition of the same form, followed by A, A. Why are they reversed? Because in many cases it is a 7-line stanza that is the model. So you have 2 lines of one sort, 3 lines of a different sort, a return to the 2 lines of the first sort. So let's see then how that works in terms of the music. These things are then chained together. Verses, individual stanzas, individual strophes, are strung together within the mizan to create the music. That's not the one we want. Let's move quickly. The jawab is an orchestral response. So. The orchestral response. Second line. Repeated. Second half. Repeated. Response. Third line. Repeat the first half. Second half. Straight into the fourth line. No repetition, no answer. And a response. Second half. Back to the original structure. It's not going to cooperate. So that is one stanza. And what happens next is, without a response, without a break, it goes directly into the next strophe, which is a 7-line strophe. So what you have is this poetic structure of 5 lines, B, 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 A, A, and a melodic structure of A, 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 B, A, interlocking in that way, further complicated by the different positioning of the orchestral response, and with no separation. In Western music, in folk music, and, even in opera, you would expect the end of a verse to be punctuated somehow orchestrally. But rather, here, it moves directly into the next stanza. And so it is disorienting, because you have what for a Western listener, the primary form of punctuation, orchestral breaks, which you get in blues, which you get in opera, which you get in all kinds of music. Orchestral breaks that occur at regularly predictable places. Here, the orchestral breaks and the enjambment, the connection of one line to another, are apparently all out of kilter. So, to try to complete the analogy that I was making earlier, and I know everybody's got to get out of here, to try to complete that analogy, what you have are these juxtapositions of small forms, of short lines, short melodic lines, fragments of poetic lines, half lines, that are being combined in different ways, the vocal and the instrumental, the repetition or non-repetition, to create a continuous form of music which seems to be boundless and also at sometimes a little bit bewildering, not following the structure that we are accustomed to, that goes on with this gradual acceleration for half hour, 45 minutes at a time. So again, I remind you that you start out with the ethos, with the stamp of nature, which is structured by measurement, and which is realized in, where is it? Sana. I didn't define sana. Sana is craft. Right? Sana is what humans do. Taba is what God does. Taba extends over the whole repertoire, over the whole nuba. But sana is the details that are created by humans, either as poets or as musicians. So within, and this is a big leap, but that's where we are. Within this system of Andalusian music, then you have, in a way, the connection of the universe, the infinite possibility of variety using small elements, and you also have the stamp of God and the work of man. I have more to say, but I think I should probably stop now.